Welcome to this workshop that I've created specially for you around dealing with really uncomfortable emotions, particularly justified anger. So this recording partly came about as a result of a question from one of my clients, but actually, interestingly, it's something I've been thinking about a lot in the past couple of years. When there are situations where things are going wrong, such as the climate crisis or a difficult relationship that you've been trying and struggling and failing to resolve in your life, there are so many uncomfortable emotions that come with that. But how can you turn these experiences into something useful and not just stay stuck or find yourself retreating repeatedly from tackling the difficulty? This is why we're here today, because I know this is challenging. I know that it has probably taken up so much of your energy, chewing over what to do or what not to do, whether you should have done something before, whether you're right to feel the way that you're feeling. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting wanting something to change and not being able to see how to create the change, or not being able to get the change to happen. And I really want you to be able to live your life to your fullest potential. If you're in a leadership role, I want you to be able to lead from a really positive energy, an energy that says, I can make a difference. And this is why I've created this workshop today. And partly I've been thinking about this because of the climate crisis. What I've noticed, and it's been really frustrating me, is that in relation to huge issues like the climate crisis, human beings tend to fall into one of two categories. There's either the avoidance, not believing, or just feeling like, look, I don't have any power, I can't do anything to make a difference category. Or there's the justified anger category, fury at oil companies, fury at, oh, well, it's probably because of our voting system or because of our current government, blaming and feeling angry with somebody else because things are not changing. And I find both of those positions deeply unsatisfying and frustrating, because it feels like they don't create any change. We just go round and round and nothing seems to change. So if you've been feeling like that, this video is made with you in mind. But the more I thought about this subject, the more I realized that actually the same challenges arise in difficult relationships. There may well be justified anger and deep, deep hurt in a relationship where your needs have not been met, where you've been trying to resolve an issue and just getting nowhere, feeling like it's insoluble. And I know that that causes a huge amount of personal pain and frustration. How can you move forward when you're faced with a situation like that? And my background is from the NHS, and I think about this a lot too from the position of leaders in organisations such as the NHS, where there are some very serious problems, where you're faced with impossible scenarios, unjust situations that rightly make you feel angry that things are not how they should be. How do you turn that energy around and keep showing up in a motivated way and actually create change? How can you do that as a person? Again, this is what I want to focus on in this session today. Now, I'm going to break this process down into 3 steps: awareness, validation, and presence. And I'm going to share a lot of information with you in this workshop. There's tons of value in this workshop. It's so deep, you can probably watch this 5 or 10 times and not necessarily get everything from it. So bear with me. What I really encourage you to do is to take notes if you want to as we're going through, but actually also go back and watch the workshop again once you've seen it in its entirety. Use this as a valuable resource for you to work through the steps, to ask yourself the questions and notice the traps that I'm going to highlight for you. I'm going to give you examples to demonstrate the steps. And I'm going to demonstrate where the traps are that we all fall into that stop us from really making progress. So be patient. Some of what I say might be very challenging for you, might bring up emotions that you perhaps haven't wanted to look at. But there's a point to all of this, because we need to be able to face up to things, to open our eyes if we're going to tackle these really difficult challenges. So be patient with yourself and be patient with the process. And obviously, if you get stuck, email me. I'll give you my email address at the end if you don't already have it, and to ask any questions that come up for you. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. If you are in a situation, and we know we're all in a situation with the climate crisis, if you're going to change it, you have to become aware of the scale of the problem. Sounds obvious, doesn't it? But this first step isn't comfortable, and you might spend years, a lifetime, knowing that a situation is dysfunctional or a relationship is not working for you without truly opening yourself up to the truth. Avoidance is very powerful. Our brains, our minds are very powerful, and avoiding the information is a very common mistake that we all make. So in order to become aware, you have to be prepared to tune in to what's going on and to what's not working. So as part of this step one, this awareness raising step, I invite you to actually make a list of the facts that you know to be true, and try to avoid adding your interpretation to the facts. I'm going to give you an example here. So if this is a relationship challenge, you might write down, we get into conflict several times a week. Fact, without interpretation. Or we tried counselling, but it wasn't helpful, or it didn't change the situation. Or perhaps I wanted to go to counselling, but my partner wouldn't come with me. Fact, no interpretation. I often feel stressed and upset by the situation. I don't know what to do. Fact, without interpretation. Maybe writing down, I'm not happy for things to stay as they are. Something needs to change. Now, moving towards those statements may in itself feel very challenging. It might be the first time that you've really, truly admitted this to yourself. This is just the first step. So take your time. If you need to stay on this step for a few days and every morning do some free writing, just writing down what you know to be true, how it feels, what you've experienced, what you've noticed, what's not okay. Just write it all down. And then also add in the impacts of the situation that you know to be true. So, for example, the conflict between us is causing our daughter anxiety, or it appears to be causing our daughter anxiety if you're not completely sure. Or I don't feel comfortable leaving my daughter with this person because of their outbursts. That's an impact. It's not just you, but somebody else as well. Another impact might be I feel isolated, or I'm overeating. You might notice that, I struggle to be heard because of this situation. I always feel like I'm in the wrong, perhaps, is one of those for you. Or I feel like my partner doesn't acknowledge or take responsibility for their part in the situation. So these are all possible facts or impacts of this situation that you're trying to tackle. If the situation you're thinking about is perhaps to do with the climate crisis, let's go for something that's not to do with a personal relationship. Write down the facts. We are seeing the consequences of climate breakdown, and it's happening quicker than we expected. That's a fact. Fossil fuels are known to contribute to climate dysfunction. That's another fact. But the climate crisis is more complex than just about temperatures. It's also about biodiversity, poverty, pollution crises. Fact. If we continue as we are, the situation will worsen. Fact. We didn't expect it to worsen this fast. Maybe not. Maybe you were more aware than most of us. But that's a fact. Another fact that you might write down is oil companies seem reluctant to stop oil production. Without interpretation, that's a fact. This makes me feel very scared for the future. That's also a fact. You might write down, we don't seem to be coming up with alternative technologies quickly enough. Or some of the potential solutions also seem to have negative impacts, such as mining for rare metals in countries where conflict and poverty and exploitation are a huge risk. These are some of the facts that relate to the issue that you're facing that's making you feel all of these feelings. You might look at the impacts, the climate crisis is making me anxious, or it's impacting many people around the world, particularly those in poverty and in the Southern Hemisphere. Notice, lean in to what you know to be true, but your brain has not wanted to look at fully. Now, when you do this, whether it's in relation to the climate, whether it's in relation to a personal relationship or something in your work, you're likely to feel some difficult emotions, frustration, anger, resentment, grief. And part of the reason people don't do step one is because they're afraid of feeling those feelings. And I really want to encourage you to take a step towards them. And if necessary, create some space to take a step towards them. Expecting yourself to just flit through this without having any impact on you is unrealistic. And if you're honest, it's already having an impact on you. It's just bubbling away beneath the surface. So ask yourself the question, am I going to leave this just bubbling away beneath the surface without ever reaching any resolution? Or am I going to create some space in my life to do this, to take this first brave step? This is challenging. I'm going to push you, but think about what's at stake here. It's really important to remember the impacts of not taking action, of staying as you are. That is what gives you the courage, the urgency, the clarity that this is a problem and it cannot go on like this. I have to do something to make a change. That's important. Okay, that's step one. Now, I'm not going to just leave you there. Step two is really important to follow closely behind step one. Most people, when they have an uncomfortable emotion, they want to retreat. And you might notice that you've felt angry about this situation before, and then you've retreated from the anger until the next situation comes along where you feel angry all over again. And so the cycle continues. So step two is validation. In order to stay with difficulty, you need to remind yourself that your difficulty is normal, that it's a normal reaction. So step two is about validating in order to stay with the difficulty rather than retreating and avoiding. If you're going to take brave steps to change a difficult situation, you have to be absolutely clear with yourself. Your emotional reaction is real and valid. If you keep second guessing that, you will not move forward. So notice that I'm not justifying anything about anyone else. I'm just talking about you and your emotional reaction. It's real and it's valid. Now, self-compassion skills help with step two. It's one of the ways that you can learn to courageously stay with difficulty. The skills of self-compassion are awareness, so naming the difficulty, reminding yourself that anyone else faced with this difficulty would feel the same way. This is our common humanity. You're not alone. Other people feel this way too. And validating that reaction as being completely understandable. That's really, really important. And then the third step of self-compassion is to support yourself whilst you're working through the difficulty. So this validation is really important, but there's also a trap here. And I really want to speak about this because it's a very common trap for any of us who start to try and practice self-compassion to fall into. It's easy to use self-compassion to self-soothe to the extent that you stop feeling the anger or the strong emotion. You stop feeling the difficulty. So often people will self-soothe and then persuade themselves that there's nothing really that needs sorting out, there's nothing really wrong, and hope that the feelings will go away. So be careful. Notice your intention. Are you trying to get rid of the feelings with the steps of self-compassion rather than staying with the difficult feelings and helping yourself to move through the difficult feelings? There's a subtle but really important difference. So notice where you've done this before. When we're very focused on a problem rather than solutions, the brain will be very activated when you think about the problem. And then you soothe yourself, or perhaps the problem seems to fade a little bit. The other person that you're upset with seems to behave a little bit better for a while. And you stop thinking about it. You stop trying to solve the problem until the next situation comes along and you're activated all over again. You're angry or upset all over again. So this is like an undulating path that never reaches any resolution because you're focusing on the problem, trying to get rid of the problem, and then you take your foot off the accelerator. You don't take action because you've soothed or you've managed to persuade yourself that the problem isn't really there or isn't really real. Does that sound familiar? We've all done it. Okay, so that's a really important thing to notice. Another trap is to self-soothe without self-validation. Now, this is really a really easy trap to fall into. You might say to yourself, oh, I feel really angry with this person, and then take yourself for a walk or eat some cake and persuade yourself that you weren't right to feel angry. And so you don't speak up, you don't tackle the situation that is actually problematic, but you avoid it because you've not validated your emotional reaction. You've sideswiped it with your self-soothing. Oh, maybe it wasn't such a problem, and maybe it's me, maybe I make too much fuss, maybe I'm a difficult person, maybe they're like that with me because I'm the problem. See how the brain goes? So you've told your brain that you were wrong and that you weren't actually angry at all. So my invitation to you today is to sit with the feelings, stay with the feelings a bit longer. They're not made up. They're there. And for whatever reason you're feeling them, you don't need to interpret. You can stay with the experience that you're having, feel it, validate it, remind yourself that you're not alone. So we come back to the example of climate challenges. Your anger at political inaction and corporate power and greed is completely justified. And if we don't tackle these issues, the situation will continue to get worse. Just like the movie Don't Look Up. Unless we're prepared to have tough and courageous conversations, we're in big trouble. So take your time with this step of validating, not self-soothing to try and diminish the feelings, to try and tell yourself that you were wrong to have the feeling, but to stay with the emotional reaction that you're having. It's valid. Other people feel it too. It's real. Stay with the feelings. And it's uncomfortable, this phase. I'll be honest with you. This is really important to feel the urgency, to feel the clarity, so that you can take positive action. But now we're going to come to step 3. And this is where the biggest trap of all lies. When we feel justified anger, and if we manage to not run away from it and to validate it and to stay with it, another problem arises. The mind, the ego mind, this is the way our human brains work. The ego mind loves to latch on to justified anger, and it starts to puff up. It loves to make other people wrong and you right. And it loves to create a powerful reaction that says, this shouldn't be happening to me. And the ego starts to grow. And before you know it, your anger is taking you away from awareness. It's taking you away from constructive action, and you get stuck. So instead of saying this situation is wrong and we need to change it, the mind, the ego mind, wants to make it personal. And it starts to say, this bastard is doing this to me on purpose. Excuse the language, I'm just giving you the voice of the ego mind. Or instead of saying, you know, this industry needs to rapidly find a new business model, otherwise we'll have to legislate to force it to. The brain wants to say, this company is willfully destroying the planet and endangering my children. It gets very emotive and very much in the driving seat. And this is very addictive. And if you think about it, you just step back for a moment. If you've told yourself or been told your whole life that your experience isn't valid, doesn't matter, if you're, you know, from a group that have been downtrodden by society, or as a woman, you've been told that anger is not appropriate, you shouldn't feel it. It's really understandable that when you first lean into the emotion, it's almost like you're waking up your ego, that I matter part of you. But the trap is that once you've awakened your awareness and you've validated your experience, it's like, boom, the ego mind wants to rush off and take over, gets into the driving seat, and it becomes personal. And you start to hear yourself saying words like should, and, you know, me, I, this is not fair. Those kind of emotions and reactions start to build. So if you've got an abusive partner or a narcissistic parent or a bullying boss, and you lean into the anger of the way you've been treated, your anger is clearly justified. And when you look around you, you're going to find lots of evidence to support that awakening to the fact that your anger is justified. You'll find books on the subject. You'll find friends telling you you're absolutely right to be angry. Validation's important, but then there's a strong chance that your ego mind is going to start to feel increasingly angry. They shouldn't treat me like this. They should know that saying those things would make me feel like this. They're doing it on purpose. Can you see what happens? It's like a shift that takes place. It's important not to disbelieve your experience. You don't want to invalidate your experience, but when the ego mind takes over, that's when you start to get into difficulty. So what can you do about this challenge? What happens to all of these feelings when the ego mind gets into the driving seat is one of two things, okay? The first is that you get so cross that you take some action from that anger, and you surround yourself with people that support your anger. But if you do this, you will notice that you feel strangely confused. It's not satisfying. Actually, almost feel like you did something wrong, that anger doesn't go anywhere. It builds. It starts to take on its own momentum. It doesn't bring you peace. Or you notice that you're getting increasingly angry and you feel so uncomfortable inside yourself that you put a lid on it. And instead, you start to berate yourself. You start to turn on yourself for having that emotional reaction. So the ego mind loves to take a very all or nothing approach. Either you're completely right or you're completely wrong. So when you start to doubt yourself, am I right to feel this angry? What the ego mind loves to do is to turn it on its head and to shame you and to start to persuade you that you're the one that's in the wrong. And interestingly, what I noticed about this happening is that you might have noticed that both of these things can happen simultaneously. Your ego mind in the driving seat can be both in this ego-driven, justified anger, which feels weird and unsafe and unsatisfying and doesn't bring you peace, and at the same time flipping that anger on its head and beating yourself up. So notice, is this what's been happening to you? And obviously, you know, when we get into that state, it's so uncomfortable. Getting stuck there is horrible. And if you've ever gone there and not known how to get out of it, it's understandable that you've wanted to retreat and to say, I can't deal with any of this difficulty. I'm going to pretend it's not happening. I'm going to pull back and retreat. It's very, very confusing. And if you're stuck in that tangled web at the moment, again, I just want to, reiterate, you're not alone. This is really common. And it's very hard. It's very hard to be stuck in this. Now, there's a third problem with this ego mind driven, justified anger, which is if you express it, the person who you're speaking to or the organization that you're speaking to will respond from their ego. It's very likely that they will get defensive. They will push back. No, I'm not wrong. You're wrong. And that's when we also end up with very polarized arguing and people completely unable to work on complex issues because they've adopted a polarized stance. They're less likely to listen or to change when you express yourself from your ego position. They're more likely to be angry with you, and you're very likely to stay angry. And so the cycle continues. And part of my frustration with some of these big world issues is we become increasingly polarized, and then it feels less and less likely that we will achieve grown-up, smart solutions. So step 3 is to know about this trap. And what I call step 3 is presence, which is to practice noticing when your mind is moving into that ego-driven, justified anger state. And you can help yourself by firstly noticing the language that is going around in your mind, the shoulds, looking at the past, thinking about the future, the word me and I coming up really strongly. They're not doing this, they should do this. Those are all very ego driven states. But also you can use questions to help yourself to come back to presence. Is it true that your partner is doing this on purpose? Are they actually able to change their behavior? Have you tried to get them to change their behavior and they weren't able to? If you think about, if I said to you now, don't eat chocolate ever again because it's harming your relationship, how easy would you find it to do that? Perhaps when you get ill or stressed, you'd relapse. Behavioral change is difficult, particularly if there's underlying trauma. So when your brain is going to, they should do this, they should know, they should have been a kind parent, they should listen to me, they should understand me. Actually return yourself to presence by asking the question, is that really true? You might want it to be true. It might feel completely unfair that you were parented in that way or that your partner has been treating you in that way. But to adopt the stance that they should know how to change will be deeply unsatisfying for you. Similarly, if we're in big global issues and we're talking about, an oil company should cease production, well, it's needed for them to do that in order for us to have a change. But perhaps they're afraid of mass redundancies in their companies, fuel poverty around the world if we don't have any better solutions. Perhaps they're just afraid of losing power. And who doesn't want power? Doesn't make it right or wrong, but the should word will polarize the discussion. Bring yourself back to presence. What is the truth of the situation? What can you know to be true? And if you don't know it's true, then you can't say it. So notice where you're falling into the trap. Now, when we start to try to tackle this ego mind state, the biggest mistake that we all make when we're like, well, hang on a minute, if I'm going to let go of my polarized position, your mind will then say, well, hang on a minute, that means giving in. If I let go of the fury, if I let go of the idea that they should do something, is that just giving in? Is that just rolling over and being utterly passive? And how would that solve anything? This is a really big question. So I'm going to illustrate this with a really sort of simple day-to-day example. Your best friend, it's their birthday and you want to cook a beautiful meal for them. So you go to the supermarket and you buy some very exotic, but locally grown, organic, expensive mushrooms to make some kind of lovely risotto, for example. They're all beautifully packaged. They came from some fancy local organic farm and you're excited to make this lovely thing for your friend. And you open the packaging when you get home and they stink and they're moldy. Now, if letting go of the ego mind position is just rolling over, does that mean that you have to just eat the moldy mushrooms, accept this really expensive thing? Well, no. The ego mind gets in charge and it would be zooming back to the supermarket. How dare you, tell me these mushrooms, they were expensive. I only bought them today. They shouldn't be like this. That's the ego mind. But the opposite, the alternative to the ego mind isn't just to eat the mushrooms. Actually, the alternative is to contact the supermarket or return to the shop and to state the facts. There seems to be a problem with these mushrooms. I bought them today and they're moldy. Can you get me a replacement or a refund? You don't have to take the bad behavior. You don't have to tolerate the global consumerism or the mismanagement or the government that's corrupt. But equally, you do not have to stay in the ego justified anger state. You can name the problem and you can tackle the problem clearly and head on. We're not going to tolerate corruption. We're not going to tolerate corruption. But we don't have to communicate that from the place of shoulds. The same with your relationship. If your partner is repeatedly unable to engage with challenges or to stay calm whilst you're trying to find solutions or go to counselling with you and remain in the room, that's just the situation that you find yourself in. There's no shoulds in there, but it is a truth that you're not going to resolve this situation unless they change. And if they can't change, they can't change. So to help you with this, I want to invite you to just close your eyes for a moment and bring to mind a situation that you have been wrestling with. Whether it's a relationship or an unjust situation. And allow the stories and the narratives and the shoulds that your mind has been saying in the background. Turn the volume up, listen to what it's been saying. Notice where the ego mind is in the driving seat. Has your mind been telling you that they're wrong, or that you're wrong, or that it either has to be them that's wrong or you that's wrong? Has your mind been telling you that it's not fair? Has your mind been taking you over and over conversations that you want to have or you've already had with this person, and getting more and more upset and angry with them for not being how you want them to be? Notice what that feels like in your body when you go down that path. And then take a nice deep breath and bring yourself back to presence. Notice your bottom on the seat, your back against the chair. Perhaps notice the sadness that you've been experiencing, the frustration of the situation that is. And leave the judgments and the expectations at the door. Let go of the idea that you can change the past. Let go of the idea that you can change another person. And bring yourself back to your breath. Bring yourself back to the simple fact that this has been hard and you haven't known how to change the situation. You've tried. Allow yourself to be with the challenge. When you let go of the expectations and the shoulds and the regrets, somebody should have parented you differently or treated you better. Let go of the past. Bring yourself to this present moment now. What's acceptable to you? What are you willing to fight for or to state? What actions are within your control? Keep bringing yourself back to this present moment, releasing all the thoughts of what someone else should have done or shouldn't have done. Letting go of all of those stories. Allow yourself to recognize that there is suffering. There is injustice. That none of us are a complete package. And we all struggle to change. And perhaps even you might notice a little compassion for this other person in your life who's been unable to meet your needs. Doesn't feel great to be a disappointment. Doesn't feel great to not be able to change. Feeling compassion for them doesn't mean you accept their behavior. Doesn't mean you stay. Notice where perhaps part of you has wanted to avoid looking fully at this situation because it's more familiar to stay the same. Perhaps it's more convenient to stay the same. But at what cost? Allow yourself to open your eyes fully. Allow yourself to feel fully. And give yourself permission to be the adult that looks for solutions rather than sticking with blame and problems. And gently coming back into the space. This last step is the most challenging. And in my experience, it also needs a regular reminder. The ego mind keeps coming back. And other people's ego minds will impact you too. Other people will behave like this towards you, which will be very challenging. Your ego mind will want to react. So this takes practice. But I think with the awareness of the traps and with a daily reminder to come back to the present moment of what is rather than what should be, it's achievable. And it's incredibly empowering when you start to feel that presence, that ability to see and to own your own experiences and take courageous action. I really hope you'll take some time to work through these steps and to reflect on the steps and any questions that come up for you. And my email address is nicolaharkercoaching@gmail.com. You're very welcome to email me if you have questions or if you've got stuck or didn't understand something. Send me your examples, send me your questions. And I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Bye for now.